All right, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. This is Sean Clean, doing another episode of my streaming series where we're working to build the tool that I'm tentatively calling Conma Repo. And that tool is to help us manage the different aspects of a GitHub organization, maybe allow us to do some things a little easier that GitHub doesn't let us do out of the box. Lately, we've been working on the functionality to help us sunset repositories. So when we're done with a repository, we can easily archive it or remove it. And so that's sort of our first feature set there as well. So along the way, we've talked about Docker, Azure DevOps. We're using XUnit to write some automated tests. And so I'm really appreciating the sort of progress that we've made so far and getting over the stumbles that we have. And so we're going to continue that progress today. I've got about an hour and 15 minutes, I think. And so we'll see if we can't use that time pretty wisely today. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and get into the stream. Okay, well, we know previously I've mentioned my employer, Excello. It's making this possible. Something that you know that I've been caring a lot about recently, well, really for a long time now, has been the Black Lives Matter movement and the idea of racial justice and social justice. And so I'm very excited that my employer, Excello, has actually recently unveiled a plan. They've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, but this is a public statement that our CEO, Burton White, has made about standing in solidarity against racial injustice. And I absolutely love it. I'm a big fan of the work that we're trying to put in to make this stuff happen. I am extremely grateful to my black coworkers who have put in more work than they probably should have to in helping us along these lines, and I really am looking forward to helping Excello make even more improvements in this space. So I love my employer because they're letting me stream this right now to you, and they believe in sharing knowledge and things along those lines, but this is another reason that I'm a big fan of them. So highly encourage you to check out Excello's statement on that. If you think there's anything that Excello could be doing better on this front, by all means, I'd say please let me know, because I'd love to report that stuff back, and Excello as a company is always looking to get better, which is one of the things that I like about it. So today's stream, as some of you who've joined me before know, one of my goals is generally to allow for a donation at each stream that I do. And so today, the group that's receiving that donation is the Black Lives Matter group. So previously we donated to the SPLC, the ACLU, the Inno3DC, Inclusion Innovation Incubator, and some other projects. And so today's donation is going to be a $25 donation to the Black Lives Matter movement, because I think it's important. So I'm going to go ahead and, if you're not familiar with this movement, hopefully you are at this point. It's an incredibly important movement, an incredibly important organization, and so I hope that you will take a little bit of time to check out the Black Lives Matter movement, learn a little bit more about what they're seeking, and hoping to be, we can act in allyship a little bit more than we perhaps have been in the past. So please feel free to check that out, and in the meantime, I'm going to put up my secret banner real quick while I go ahead and fill out the payment details and make this donation. All right, one moment. All right, so we've gone ahead and made that donation, and so with that, we are going to go ahead and get to the stream. All right, so let's take, first of all, since we last left off, we've done a little bit of work. Oh, I don't want to go to Twitter. Let's go to the repository here. When we last left off, I'd done a little bit of work. And I believe where we last left off, we were working on the ability to archive. We had just gotten to the ability to actually archive a repository, which is great. And so since that time, I'm going to scroll back a little bit and see what we've done here. Since that time, we have bumped Octokit a version. We have worked on the authentication and the Azure AD. We bumped that. Created a Dependabot config file and added Dependabot. For those of you not familiar with Dependabot, I highly recommend you check out Dependabot. I believe it's dependabot.com. So Dependabot was bought by GitHub, and they have the package updates, and they'll automatically submit pull requests to your repository for package updates. Phenomenal tool. It saves me a ton of time. It's a huge time saver. I absolutely love it. Can't recommend it enough. So we created a Dependabot config file, and what that looks like is pretty simple. We say, okay, it's version 2 of the Dependabot config. It's going to be NuGet updates that we're looking for. Anything under the source folder. It's going to look daily at 10 a.m. and it won't open more than 10 pull requests at a time. So that's great. All right, there's one thing that we've gotten done there. Okay, so another thing that we've done is we were able to sunset the controller, and we started doing some caching, and we got the caching in place. That's right, now I've got it. We had the caching in place. We removed the privacy page. We've added some labels for the table rows, and now we've got some links on the home page. So just look at the experience of using the tool right now. So we've got a link to sunset and archive repositories, which is the only thing the tool can do currently. Go ahead and click on that. We'll let it load that up. So a reminder, it's going out and fetching all 300 or so repositories for the organization right now. It's going to cache those in a memory cache for 24 hours. And so, for example, I can see here we've got some projects there that are still active from 3 years ago, for example. We can see this project and click on it. I can see it's got 2 watchers, no recent issues, no views in the past 14 days, last updated 3 years ago. So I'm going to go ahead and archive that. We see clicking the link will archive the repository, archive AWS Data Lab, and there we go. Great. So now we can see that, so that's working correctly. However, we have had a bug reported in the last by one of our users, Mike Brown, who's an awesome colleague of mine. I appreciate him taking time to test drive the tool. And Mike found an interesting issue. He found that when attempting to archive a repository that does not have issues enabled, the issues are disabled for this repo. So let's go ahead and recreate that. First off, I'm going to go to my Azure portal, and I'll stream the logs just so that you can see what's going on with that. I'll go ahead and I'll open up this page here. We'll go to our log streaming, just because I want to be able to show you what's actually happening behind the scenes, since we'll get a friendly developer error page. So I'm going to my log stream here in my Azure website, which is super useful. Okay, I'll go ahead and clear that log stream, and then let's go ahead and we can see. Let's go back to our list of repositories here. You see it loads much faster now. Let's see. Kudos app. It's got 1 open issue. Okay, so let's look at this app real quick. I'm going to go to the actual GitHub page within our org just to kind of get an idea. Okay, so there's just some general information here. I see the issues are currently enabled for the repository. So issues are currently enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and disable that because this is an old repository anyway. We're able to. So go ahead and turn that off. Issues no longer exist here. So let's go to the app again. Okay, so now this app no longer has issues enabled. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go and try and archive this repository here. Well, you should see here, okay, it's got 4 watchers, it's got 1 open issue / pull request, no forks, and we see, okay, 3 years ago. So if I go to archive this, we'll see an error. An error occurred while processing your request. Well, that's a bummer. So if we look over at our streaming logs, we actually see the contents of the error, which is why I love the ability to quickly stream logs here. And let me see if I can find the actual error message here. So here we see message, issues are disabled for this repo. So I'm actually getting a message back from Octokit that it can't actually fulfill the request because issues are disabled. As part of the archival process, we create an issue in the repo so that it kind of notifies anybody who's watching it that the repo will be archived. So we can see here, which throws an Octokit API exception, and the message is issues are disabled for this repo. So it's super helpful that Octokit does that, and it gives me the ability to work around it. So Mike found that, and so I think we're going to go ahead and add some error handling into our into that process, and also see if we can write some automated tests around that. So sound good? All right, let's dig into it. So here I'm going to go ahead and pull my latest repository branch there, and I'm going to see what issue number is that I'm working with. 69, okay. So say resolve exception handling no issues. Okay. It's a terrible branch name probably, but we'll go ahead and we'll roll with it. Okay. So I've got my exception handling here. Okay. Oh, sorry, let me scroll that correctly. All right, there we go. And for those of you on the stream, by the way, I know I say this occasionally, but one, don't forget to go ahead and hit follow and subscribe for the latest. And two, feel free to jump in the chat. I'd love to know where you're from. I'd love to know what you're doing. I'd love to know, how you found this channel. So really, tell me anything about yourself. I'd love to know something about you. Okay. So we've got our branch created here. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and open that. Can I open it in Visual Studio? I never remember. No. Okay. Go ahead and open that in Visual Studio. Okay. So while that's opening, I'm just going to refamiliarize myself and talk through the code here a little bit. All right. So we've got a controller that is doing the archival. We've got a service that we're using that we've created to do that. And so I think we've got a test that we can write here and work it out for our service, our GitHub service here. So our tests here for the GitHub service, well, let's look at what our actual service is doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the GitHub service. So our GitHub service here, we have this function archive repository, this method archive repository. We can see here that it takes in the repository ID and the repository name, which is the name is required for the repository update. So we just make that required on our function as well. So we have a repository update that we create, a repository update, and we tell GitHub to edit the repository. We also have a task here to create an archive issue in the repository. So we see it creates a new issue, and then we have the GitHub client issue.create. And so this is being called from, Visual Studio is frozen there. We'll give it a second. All right, so create the archive issue in repo is being called from our sunset controller when we actually call to archive a repo. We get the current user information, we get the logger information, or we have the logger, we get the GitHub service, the repo ID and name are passed in from our list, and then we go ahead and we create the archive issue, and then we go ahead and archive the repository. So here's where things are blowing up, right? So the GitHub service, what we want to know is that if GitHub service creates an archive issue in the repo. So I think what we want to say is if the GitHub service encounters an error where the issue already exists while it's creating the archive issue, we should just not worry about it, right? We should swallow that exception because in this case, creating an issue when issues don't exist, we don't want to do that anyway. And so I think the test that we're looking for is, in the GitHub services create archive issue in repo method, we want to detect an error coming from the GitHub client, and we want to go ahead and ignore that error and make sure that we still return successfully. All right, so we're going to assert that something doesn't throw. So let's go to our unit tests here. We already have a test file for GitHub service. It's just to scroll up to the top and remind us what we've got. We've got a class for the constructor. We've got a class that tests get repositories for organization. it sounds like we're going to want to, oops, yeah. We're going to want to maybe, we're going to want to write a test for the method that is named, I just want to copy it so I make sure I've got it right. Create archive issue repo. All right, so the test here, the test class, right? We'll name it. I do a test class per method, just how I do my personal style for these kind of tests, right? So I've got GitHub service tests. All the tests for create, archive, issue, and repo are going to go under here, and then I want to say a fact, public void when. Say when. Oops, I accidentally started a build. That's not what I wanted. Sure. When client. Alright, so let's say when issues are disabled, doesn't throw exception. Alright, that seems reasonable enough. So we're going to go ahead and say we'll create our SUT, our situation under test again. We know we're going to need to create a new GitHub service. We know we're not going to be able to pass in an iGitHub client and an iGitHub settings. So let's go ahead and steal some stuff from our setup here. This is the kind of stuff I don't mind copying from class to class. Go ahead and do that. We'll copy our constructor here. And then we'll go through what that stuff actually does. Public. All right, so what have we done here? We've just gone ahead and set up our stuff again. So we hear that we see that we set up the situation under test. We create mocks for the repositories and the settings here that we need, and then we pass those into our situation under test. So we should be able to affect the behavior of the mock and then assert what we're looking for. So I think what we're looking for here is action act equals, we'll create an action here, and the action is that our situation under test, whenever we call, create that, and we'll throw in we'll say var 0. I wonder if I can just use the underscore. Forget about that C# convention. Can I do that? No, I couldn't remember if I could do that or not. So var ID that doesn't matter. I like to give those kind of extra description names. I know that these variables are sort of throwaway in this case. So name that doesn't matter. Right, so we'll give those names here. We'll make sure that we pass in the ID that doesn't matter, the name that doesn't matter. And what we're going to say is that we want to set up our mock first. So our mock client, we're going to set it up so that when what am I actually calling in the GitHub service? We're calling issue, gonna create. Okay, so we're gonna have to do something with the issue client, I think. So we'll have to say repository dot, x dot issue dot creates. When it's called with any, and any new issue. So whenever it's called with anything, we're going to make sure it throws an Octokit exception. Ooh, can I actually make it do that? Oh, an API exception, sorry. That's right. Octokit.api exception. And I'm trying to remember what the setup is for making sure that I can actually do the. Well, for now, we say it should throw an API exception, right? Because that shouldn't. I think that's the first thing. We'll want to make sure that when it's. So we'll have to set up another test here. Because what I'm realizing is that I say, okay, I don't want it to throw an exception, or I don't. So we want it to throw an exception when the client throws an API exception. And I'm trying to see if I can. Okay, I can pass in the exception. So there, exception, throw, API exception. The API exception takes a message. We can see here that from our log streaming, it is issues are disabled for this repo. Sure. Okay. String is not assignable for an iResponse. Okay, so let's look at that. API exception needs to. Okay. Let's double check to see what the status code is coming back on. I guess it doesn't matter at this point, so I'll just do. And then we'll say HTTP status code. We'll say bad request. I'm not actually sure which one it is. I really only care about the message at this point. So we'll rename this to issues disabled exception. All right. So now we've got do constant int there, and then we'll say constant string. All right. Okay. So we've got our int, we've got our string, we've got the exception. Whenever the issue client is returned, and that is, and then the create method is called with those parameters, it's definitely going to throw that. And then we're going to say. So we have our action here. The action is to call the archive repository. And what we should say here, what we should show here is it should still not throw an exception. So we should make sure that doesn't throw. All right. So right now, that's passing, and that's okay. That's not correct then, because I think it's not getting to our setup. So I think what we need to do is create a var mock issues client. So we'll create a new mock of our issues client there. And we'll set that up. Call that. So we'll call setup on that. All right, so now we've got, right, so now we have our mock issues client. Now we want to make sure that whenever x.issue is called, it returns the mock issues client. All right. So now interesting. Our tests should. Oh, we're not awaiting. I don't think, right? So let's go ahead and await that, and let's also go ahead and call this async and make it return a task. Make the anonymous function async. There we go. Now we should see. Oh, cannot use action assertions on an async void method. Assign the async method to a variable of type func task instead of action so that it can be awaited. All right. That works for me. That was really helpful. That was really helpful documentation. That's awesome. So we should see, okay, so now we see the exception, right? So the test fails, right? Because we're saying is when issues are disabled, doesn't throw an exception, right? We want to make sure that that works, okay? So let's go ahead and go to our GitHub service. So we're going to go ahead and, so it's awaiting a void here. And what we're going to say is, believe, so we'll just do, we'll do a try catch. Right, so we'll say we'll catch. And right now, right, we'll do an API exception. Right, so we'll do that now. Look at the, so one thing that you should notice here is I'm just doing a blanket catch exception for all the API exceptions, which is definitely not something we want to do. And so this is the kind of thing where we'll work on that and in our next test. Okay, so try that. All right, we'll catch that API exception. Right, we're not going to do anything with it. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So right now, this test, our test should pass. Yep, there you go, and it does, right? So it no longer throws an exception, right? So we've got that. Okay, so I have a spelling dictionary update too. We'll just do meta spelling update. That's fine. All right, so we've got the GitHub service tests. Test when our issues are disabled, and then make the test pass. So again, I've done something pretty I've done something in TDD where I've done the simplest thing that can make my test pass, essentially, where I now making sure that I just catch all the exceptions and throw anything away. But that's not great, right? So I still want to make sure that another issue gets caught. So maybe so it's really so I want to say when client throws error unrelated to disabled issues, throws exception. So in this case, I am still going to say that it should throw. I'm going to go ahead and copy my test here. Now what I want to show is I'll have that to exception message to throw. Okay, and so we see that the issues are disabled. So let's go ahead now and change it to a different message. We'll call it message unrelated to disabled issues. Go ahead and say issues. Blah blah blah. Right. Go ahead and do that. And so now what we want to say is, I'm going to go ahead and disable that once. Okay. So we've got our client here. We are setting it up. It's going to return this exception now with this blah 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 text, and I'm going to say it should throw, and it should throw an API exception at this point because that's what we're doing. So we want that to be passed on. This test should fail, right? Because we are no longer throwing the API exception there. Now let's go ahead and put that here. If dot message equals, let's go ahead and copy that. Okay. If that happens, right, we're gonna what we want to say is really if it doesn't equal that, then we're gonna throw. So we can see that here. What we should see when the tests run. If I'm getting this right, maybe I'm not. There we go. Our tests pass, and so. Alright, so now we're making sure we only catch it in that one specific situation. Now the last thing I want to do, we can see here that in our GitHub service, we actually don't have a logger. Right, so I'm thinking I want to pass in a logger. Well, first off, let me go ahead and say another test round. Okay, but we should probably push this to our branch here. We'll go ahead and create a pull request. Why not? So don't throw exception when creating an issue in repo that has them disabled. Okay, and we'll say results issue number 69. Okay, we'll make this a work in progress. Got one thing left. Okay, so I want to make sure that I've got a logger coming into this, because one of the things I want to do is log a warning, right? So we can say, hey, we tried to create an error, we tried to create an issue in this repository, but it didn't, issues were disabled. So I just want to kind of have that in the logs for if I ship them, and also because I feel like whenever you catch an exception like that, you should always kind of document it, because what you're saying is essentially something has not gone according to plan. And so I probably should have more robust error handling in general around the Octokit API and things like that right now. But for now, what I'm saying is, looks like things went okay. So I'm going to go ahead and write that last test. So first of all, it's going to involve me injecting a bunch of stuff. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got my GitHub service test. So that means let's add another thing to my constructor. Right, we've got my constructor tests. So I'll create a mock for that because I know I'm going to use that in the next test. An iLogger of GitHub service. Sorry, mock logger equals new. All right. So I've created that mock logger. Now I'm going to go ahead and write our test here. Oops, we'll say a null logger throws an exception. Scroll down to the bottom there, paste that. Okay, null logger throws an exception. So we're going to have our GitHub client. GitHub settings is going to be our settings, and we're going to pass in null for our logger. She's to throw a new null exception, and the param name should be logger. Now that's going to work. Not going to work yet because our GitHub client doesn't have anything where it doesn't accept a logger. I know I'm going to have to go up here and do these things, but in a second just to get it to build. So I'm going to go ahead and pass that in for now. Do that here as well. All right. Now we'll go ahead and update the GitHub service to take in private read-only iLogger of GitHub service logger. Bring that in here. Alright, so we're taking in the logger now. So with any luck, this should build. It may not still build. I may have to edit it somewhere else still. Looks like that is the case. Let's see here. I'm gonna have to make sure I at least have a mock logger here. Nice, let's go ahead and I'm gonna copy that to some other tests here just to get it to build. Alright. Here. Go ahead and create it there. So we've added it into the other test now, and then we've got one left down here where I think we have again. Now it's a little repetitive, but I still like the format of these tests because they're a little bit self-contained, and so I'm a big fan of that. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll set up that again. All right, so now we've got our logger added in, which hopefully will get us to the spot where this test can fail. Of course, I'm going to be failing to build still, which is fine. Okay, logger was never used. Okay. So we add the service here. We actually have to go ahead and get an iLogger, right? So we have the I options of GitHub settings. So we should say var logger equals provider.getService, which should be an iLogger of GitHub service. So we'll have to inject that for runtime's sake. All right, now we should be building. All right, still building. All right, now we should see our test fail. One test failing, which is what we were looking for at this point. All right, so it doesn't throw on the logger, so let's go ahead and do that. Logger equals logger or I'm gonna start up some music as well. It's been a minute. All right, there we go. All right, so we've got our logger and our failing tests. So we'll just go ahead and say inject logger. And at this point, our test actually should be passing, so let's see what's going on there. Looks like GitHub settings came in first, so interesting. Now this is interesting because it looks like we're getting something. Oh, I'm getting a phone call. One moment. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we've got our logger here. Now what I'm curious about, and one of the things that struck me just now, is that we've got our logger here, right? But if you look at it, what we can see here is the test is failing, but it's not expecting, it's not the right thing. So it's actually throwing the expecting, it's throwing the error as GitHub settings, even though we passed that in, which is interesting here. So we can see that I'm always calling GitHub settings .value, and it looks like that might not be the right way to do it actually in this area. I bet if I did this, pasted it, our test would work. So that's interesting, right? So that means there's something going on here where I'm calling this out. That's really interesting. So I think what I want to do is I need another test here, right? So I need another test that I missed previously, where I said, okay, null options, null everything. I think what I want to do is create another class here, or another test here that says fact void has all dependencies, doesn't throw, right? So I think what I want to do is pass this in and say, okay, if I've got my dummy client object, and I've got my settings, and I've got my logger, then this should not throw. Right, and that should run, I guess that'll fail too, right? Because if we're looking at that, then what would happen is we should see GitHub settings. So something's happened there. Value cannot be null in GitHub settings, right? So I think the good news is I think this just has to do with our setup here in the dummy settings method, because we're calling the value here, so it's expecting some GitHub settings here, and that's fine. So we'll say read only GitHub settings, dummy settings, new. Okay, so we'll just make sure that doesn't return, or that doesn't, cause us any problems in our setup here. So before we do any tests for the constructor, we'll have a constructor, funny enough, and we'll say dummy client So we have our dummy settings. We'll set that up so that whenever the value is called, we'll return the dummy settings objects. Okay, so that should get us to a spot where our tests pass, and it's just really the setup there. Because that's being injected at a system level, we can trust that that's happening, so it's really just the setup of our test, I think. So I feel okay with that. So now we're at the spot where our tests are passing. Let's go ahead and look at what we've got here. Okay. So it's really a test that we missed previously. Alright, good. So we've got that there. Alright, now where are we? Now the spot, okay, so we've got the logger injected. What we want to do next is I want to look at the archive, create archive issues in repo. I want to double checking this here. Hold on. Okay. Do we need to await this? No. Huh. So just because of void, I think, possibly. Interesting. I guess because we're defining async inside that func of a task, it'll await it on its own. So that's great. Okay. Easy enough. So we'll say don't need async because we're using a func of task instead. Great. Okay. So next up, I want to write my last test, which is to say that I want to double check and make sure that when it does throw an issue, or when issues are disabled, logs a warning. Go ahead and copy that. So what issues are disabled, we're setting that. Now we're going to say here we are going to directly await it. So we'll change this to an async task. All right. So now that we've called that, we're going to want to start on the logger. Let's say logger verify. We want warning, log warning to be called, and we want the string, the message, to be issues disabled for. Well, let's look at this API exception. I wonder if the API exception tells us which. I wonder if the API exception will tell us which repo it was created for. Let's see. There's an API error. No, there's no specific repository name there. We have source, and maybe there's some data that's sent along with that. But for now, okay, that's not really a thing. So, oh, we can actually, we do have the repo ID here, so let's, we can do that. Let's go ahead for repo ID, and we'll want to say here we'll change it from ID that doesn't matter to repository ID. We'll give it a value that does matter. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll go ahead and for repository ID 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we should see that, and that should fail right now, right? Because we're not calling that, obviously. And so let's go ahead and we'll call that here, logger.log warning. Issues disabled for repository ID. We'll make that a formatted string. And then we'll say here, this should be repo ID. That should go ahead and pass our test. Interesting. Extension methods here may not be cool. Ah, okay. Right. And then it should be called with, we'll say with repo ID. Okay, and here we should have similarly not a formatted string, but the actual repo ID here. See if that works itself out there. Okay, so there's going to be an issue with the extension methods here, I think, right? Interesting. Well, let's commit this at least for now as a failing test, right? Call it failing test plus attempt. So worst case scenario, if I've got to log off or change something here, we should be able to do that. Okay. Extension methods here. So log warning may not be used in setup or verification expressions. Let's go ahead and Google how people prefer to get around that in this case. So let's go ahead and look at extensions logging and mocking iLogger with mock. Hey, great article. Let's see. Adam Store. Thank you, Adam. Let's bookmark that for reference. If you've used, you'll most likely come across iLogger extensions. In case of iLogger extensions, all the extension methods end up calling public void log, so you have to look to mock the call to logger.log above. That seems reasonable. Okay. T-state should be anything. However, the underlying state, which the iLogger uses formatted values. So sample test class. I'm skimming, by the way, so this is something where I'm just looking really quickly. We'll see if we can get this worked out. Okay. Okay. This is a phenomenal walkthrough, by the way. Highly recommend this. This is really nice. The different attempts and watching how he goes through it. This is great. Okay, so let's give this a shot, actually. This is pretty great. Okay. Alright. So this is really interesting. One, because, wow, the serial logger is way easier to do this with. I'm tempted, I will say, I am tempted to switch to Serialog just based on the experience of mocking this out alone. Mocking Serialog was not so bad at all. Okay. Good reference to the prior article as well. This is great. Okay. Alright, so let's go ahead and give this a shot. So we will go ahead and, so we want to see the warning here. So let's check out what we're actually verifying here. I think for now we'll remove this, we'll change this to mock logger.verify, and we will verify that the log level is warning. We want any event ID, any, well, we want the state. It is a GitHub service. Okay, I'll double check something. Okay, gotcha, I misunderstood. Okay. So I want to verify the message. Now, so this should still be, let's go ahead and comment that out so we know our test is failing. Make sure it's failing for the right reasons. So make sure it builds. Okay. So the expected message. Okay, so expected message here should be sorry, apparently the toolbox feels the need to initialize. so let's go back to our service here. The message that we want. Equals okay. Okay. So we should see. Okay, wasn't performed. So let's go ahead and try that. Should hopefully see the test pass. Nope, still not passing. That's okay. Let's see what the invocations were that happened. You know what? This is aggravating enough that I'm actually going to do a separate. I'm going to do a separate pull request for this. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not so tied to like Microsoft extensions logging, and this is a terrible testing experience, and I much prefer the Sierra log testing experience. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this test. I'm just going to replace it with a to-do verify that the logger was called, because that's not the purpose of today and I don't want to get too in the weeds. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this and straight up copy it into a new GitHub issue. Okay, I'll go ahead and say log warning when disable in repo. Okay, so we'll say give service tests dot archive issue. Let's quote that test that we should do here. All right, so got it for now, and then I'll go ahead and revert it. And I'm going to go add another issue here to switch to Sierra log logging with Microsoft logging extensions as a sync. That'll be a fun topic to do. Okay, so since we aren't actually going to do this, I'm going to go ahead and revert that commit. Oh, first let's go ahead and save everything so we can then revert our changes that we just made. Okay, we'll go ahead and revert that. Cool. Let's go and push those up. All right. So we should then be able to go ahead. Typo. Go ahead and commit that. Okay, so it's built, so we should be able to, using this, go to the home page and double check that. Remember, I still have that repo disabled, so I'm going to go go ahead and fire it up locally. And once that builds and loads up here, we should be able to see it in action. All right, loading up. Yes, I know it's a security risk. All right, so we've got we'll go ahead and let it load up. It's non. We'll go ahead and take the WIP off of this in the meantime. All right, so you see our home page. we should be able to look at. Did I not? Huh. I could have sworn Flash Kudos app. Oh, it may have been updated. Here, let's see. We can see here that actually something happened here. It was updated because I attempted to do something with it. And so it was updated a short while ago. That's okay. So we'll go ahead and, right, we see it's got that. Let's go ahead and archive it. Now this time we shouldn't see that error, right? If all goes well, we should actually see it work completely fine. All right, so archive successfully. Let's go ahead and look at that. We'll refresh just to make sure. Great. All right, so we can see that that now has been fixed. Let's go ahead and squash that. We'll wait for the build to finish. And then we'll squash that. That'll be the time we have for today, right? So we squashed a bug. I'm probably going to go through the process of adding Serolog and doing some of that stuff because I really, really like Serolog. And we'll go from there and we'll figure it out. So double check this. See, we probably got a couple more seconds to go. Oh, literally almost done. Okay. Great. All right, here we go. Success. All checks were successful. All of our tests are passed. Double check and make sure we're still running our tests. I think we set that up last time. Double check in here. Maybe just refresh this page. Okay, we do run our tests. They are passing. Great, great, great. All right. Squash that, which removes that issue. I'm going to go ahead and actually ping my colleague, Mike. Okay. Go ahead and comment that. All right. Great, so we're at that spot now. We've got the pull request closed. The issue is done. All right, I think we're in a good place then. So I'm going to go ahead and actually stop the stream for now. Let's go ahead and turn some of this sound down here. All right. So since I've got a meeting in a little bit, I've got to cut it off there. I think the next topics, when we pick up either later today or tomorrow, we'll pick up with the idea of introducing Serolog just to get that cleaned up and get that synchronized. Plus, it gives us a chance for me to talk about Serolog, which is one of my favorite .NET libraries, and getting that set up to play well with extensions.logging, and we'll make sure that that's all working well as we'd expect. So tune in next time. We'll work on that, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. So until next time, stay well, and I love you, and Black Lives Matter, and I hope that you are all taking care of each other in strange times. All right, we'll see you again soon. Bye.